There's two things to this now. A, I don't know if it's going to work. And B, I don't know if it's going to work because I haven't necessarily done this like this before. So we're all guinea pigs in this grand new trial of a class right now. The part of it why I do think it could work is because once we've been through the first 53 chapters of Tanya, a lot of what's in what this is going to be is built upon that. So even though the whole method of what's going to happen here is going to be a little bit different, but there's going to be a lot of familiar concepts too. I think we've created kind of the foundation to be able to try this out. It's not totally arbitrary. What we're going to try here is what's called a Maamar. So a Maamar is a Chassidic discourse. There were two things that when there was like a Farbrengen or in general, the Rebbes would either say what's called a Sicha. It's like a talk, and like a Maamar, which is a Chassidic discourse. The discourse is much deeper, much more drawn out. There's way more going on in a Maamar than just a Sicha. Kahas, which is the Lubavitch publishing company, they've taken some of those and they've printed them as individual. And there's a whole set that's called the Chassidic Heritage Series. So I'm also going to very much highlight this is where I'm getting it from, because most of what I'm doing is going to be based on here, especially because I haven't done it before, so I haven't yet been able to build it out too much. What they'll do is they'll take specific ones, they'll translate it, they'll add kind of commentary, make sure the footnotes are there with greater explanation. There's a bunch of them, but this particular one actually went through it recently and kind of trying this out. I was like, you know what, I think we can actually get it having been through Tanya. They call it oneness in creation. Starting point of it is Shema. So I figure that's also a good thing because we all know Shema, the prayer that we're all familiar with. So this will also give a much deeper, we're going to take it and we're going to do a Chassidic lens on it. So we're going to do a really deep dive to a Chassidic approach to saying Shema, like what the first line of Shema is. And it works similar also to the way the first chapter of Tanya is. Because Tanya, remember, starts off, the soul is given an oath, be a tzaddik, don't be a rasha, which actually, the line comes up in here. That first line is a teaching that's taken from the Gemara. The Alter Rebbe expounds upon it, brings in verses from all over, building this whole case of Tanya. This particular Maamar does the same thing. It starts off with something from the Gemara, and it says, okay, what does this mean? And it starts breaking it down. I don't call it the scenic route, but we're not cutting to the short answer. We're taking the long way to get there, because through the long way of getting there, we do a much deeper exploration. We're doing the 3-day hike instead of just the 1-mile hike to the top of the waterfall. So that's kind of what this idea is. So we'll see how it goes. Again, I think this one in particular, I think we could get. This one was said by the previous Rebbe. The previous Rebbe is called the Friedrich Rebbe or the Rebbe Rayatz. So the previous Rebbe, his name was Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Shneersohn. Our Rebbe was his son-in-law. He married his second daughter. He had 3 girls. He married his second daughter. The Rebbe would always refer to the previous Rebbe as the Rebbe. Even when he became a Rebbe, when the Rebbe was referring to the previous Rebbe, he sometimes he'd say, the father-in-law, but he'd also say the Rebbe. So we know that the Rebbe taught us. And he was talking about the previous Rebbe. So it actually started in 1929. It was in Elul, so it's kind of September time of 1929. The previous Rebbe came to America on this 10-month kind of tour of all the larger Jewish communities, specifically ones where there were a Chabad community set up, starting in New York. This particular one was Chicago. The Rebbe ended up in 1930. A couple months later, the Rebbe was in Chicago. There were Chassidim there, or people affiliated with the Chassidic Brotherhood, and the Rebbe came and he spent Shabbos with them and the whole thing. And so on Shabbos, he delivered this Chassidic discourse. A lot of the Maamars, the Chassidic discourse, are called kind of like the first couple of words that are in it. So it's called Kol Hamaarich Bechod. What I'm going to try to do also for this one is bring in a lot more text. So the times that verses from the Torah are quoted, or from Tehillim, Tanakh, or the Gemara even, where it's brought from, I'm going to bring them in so that way you'll see much more where everything is coming from. Because again, also, I think we now have much more of a foundation to be able to do that. The other thing is, unlike Tanya, we have key concepts that each chapter kind of had its own punchline, even though the chapters built upon each other. This one, we're going to have a lot of ideas that are going to stack. So they're going to stack until we eventually get to the punchline at the end. So we'll have to see, because we have to sustain the thought for much longer. Anyway, so here we go. So let's try it out. Just as a general idea, this discourse focuses on the first line of Shema. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. When they talk about it, when we look at the Gemara, if we would go to the Talmud, we see that it's spoken about there. And I can tell you where all the sources are. It's in Brachos 13b. Everyone's got their Talmuds out, right? So it tells us here. So it says, Tanu Rabbanan, our sages have taught, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Ad kan tzricha kavanas halev. Do you remember that word kavana? Kavana with the whole wings of the bird and the love and the fear of the wings of the bird. So we said, what is kavana? Kavana is intention. Here they're going to translate it. We're going to use the word concentration. Here we have to focus is kind of what it's saying. So ad kan tzricha kavanas halev. Until here is where we need intention from the heart. Or to say concentration of the heart has to happen until here. As in until this first line. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's what Rabbi Meir says. So there was a great sage, his name is Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, the first line of Shema, you have to have a lot of concentration of the heart. Amar Rava, so another sage comes in. This is how the Gemara goes. Halacha Rabbi Meir, Rava says the halacha is like Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says the first line of Shema is where we have concentration of the heart. And Rava says, agreed, I concur. So far so good, we got this. Now comes the next line. Tanya Somchos Omer is taught that Simcha said, Kol Hamaarich Bechod. You see right there, that's the title of the Maamar. Kol Hamaarich Bechod, Marich Laharoch. It's whoever makes long. So whoever prolongs, elongates, protracts, the word echad, the word one, marichin lo yamav v'shnosav. His days and years are prolonged. Have you ever been in shul sometimes, or if you ever heard someone say the Shema and they do like echad? Have you ever heard that before? So this is where it's coming from, because they're drawing out the word. He says that if you draw out this word of echad, the word which means one, if you draw it out, your days and your years are prolonged. Amar Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said, Ubadalas. Dal is the Dalid, the letter Dalid. Specifically, you're supposed to prolong the Dalid. So it's not just echad, but it's echad, prolong the Dalid sound. Amar Ravashi says back, provided that he doesn't hurry the ched. Okay, we have the first line of Shema, we know, Shema Yisrael, Shema Kel Shema Chad. Rabbi Meir says, this first line of Shema, this is where you have to have concentration of the heart. Okay, Rabbi says, agreed, this is what the halacha is. This is the line to have concentration on. Now the next person comes in and he's like, if you make the word echad longer, you're going to have long life. Your days and years are going to be longer. And then it's like, no. It's the Daled that has to be long. Right? So the end of the word has to be elongated. And the next person comes in, you could do that as long as you don't rush through the middle letter. So you get to like echad, that's the echad. That's the Talmud. That's the Gemara part. Now we come into the Maamar part. The Maamar now is going to ask a bunch of questions. So we're going to see the questions that we're going to build upon. Number one, from everything, why is it echad? What's special about this word echad, the word of one? Why Shema? Maybe Shema should be the long word. Yisrael, why is it echad? Making echad longer, how does this prolong someone's days and years? Oh, you want to have like long life? You want your days and years to be prolonged? Okay, magic word. Say echad really long in Shema, and that's going to do it for you. What does it mean that you have to prolong the Daled without hurrying through the ched? Basically, we're saying, what are we talking about here? Translate. All these questions have mushed it into one. What are we talking about? And then the last one is, why is concentration of the heart only required until here? Oh, we're supposed to have concentration of the heart, have kavana. Why are we singling out this line? All of Shema should be said with lots of kavana. All of davening should be said with lots of kavana. These 4 questions are kind of what our whole deep dive is going to address. We have the learning that we've taught from the Talmud. And now we're going to take our Chassidic lens and we're like, we got a couple questions here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to explain what does it mean concentration of the heart versus concentration of the mind. Like, why can't I just have this like intellectual thing? Why does it have to be of the heart specifically? Because these are terms, especially concentration of the heart is going to come up a lot. We have to understand what we're talking about in this context. Concentration of the mind, it means focusing the mind on something is kind of the general idea. This is something that requires a lot of intellectual exertion. You have to apply your mind to learning something. You got to break your brain a little bit. That's kind of what it means. We've done this a lot already. We've seen that a lot with Tanya, that if you want to instill a certain emotion in your mind, see how we sort of have already the foundation for this. Tanya also spoke about we have to train ourselves. What do you mean we're supposed to do it for 5 hours a day? How are you supposed to do it? Well, you got to do a minute at a time and you'll get there. You have to turn it into a habit. General idea is when we talk about concentration of the mind, it's an intellectual exertion. It's also an abstraction. It's just delving into these ideas. It doesn't necessarily mean there's a concrete outcome. It's kind of like Chachma Bina, but now we need Das. Das would be the application of it. When we talk about concentration of the heart, that would be where the dot aspect comes in. It doesn't use these terms in the Maamar, but according to what we've learned in Tanya, this is kind of be sort of like the parallel of it. Concentration of the heart is the application of the intellectual understanding. Specifically, part of what we're trying to do is to refine our character. And we want to uproot the negative traits, we want to implant good traits, then the heart distributes to all the limbs. The same as the heart pumps blood to all the limbs. The whole idea of sitting and thinking about God or Torah mitzvos or trying to figure something out is to refine ourselves. It's not just supposed to be something that stays in abstraction or that stays in an intellectual place. It's supposed to be something we're supposed to apply to make ourselves better. That's the whole point of everything. So it's kind of, we're already seeing, we can kind of foresee that what we're trying to say is that this kavanah and Shema Yisrael, Shema Kel Shema Chad is something that's supposed to have some sort of effect on us. Supposed to have some sort of impact on us. We're going to have to do a long intellectual pursuit of it. But it doesn't end with the intellectual pursuit because you have to have concentration of the heart and not just concentration of the mind. So that means that we're going to somehow affect ourselves through what we're going to be figuring out intellectually. This is our starting point. And now we're going to have a lot of the different concepts are going to come up that we have to explain and figure out what it is. Do you remember when we spoke about how there's different names of God? There's different names of God according to what sort of interaction or relationship we're speaking about. And remember when we learned about when the world's created, we have what's called the Shem Havaya and the Shem Elokim. And the Shem Havaya is what creates the world, but Shem Elokim kind of covers it over. That's what the word is Helem, which means hidden, because Shem Elokim is Shem of nature, Shem Havaya, whatever. Okay, well here we're explaining it again. Now, why do we choose these 2 names of God? Well, because look at Shema. The Shem Havaya, if you see it written out, there's a Yud, and then there's a Hey, and then there's another Yud, and then there's another Hey. It's a name that we don't properly pronounce because it's considered a name that's on a very high level. It speaks to a much higher level of God. We're calling it the Shem Havaya. That's how we're referring to it. And then we have the Shem Elokim, which Elokeinu, right? Elokeinu is our Elokim. These are the two names that we're speaking about specifically because these are the names mentioned in Shema. So now we have to figure it out. What are we talking about here? So Shem Havaya, which you see, we put the English there, the name of Havaya, this refers to God as the infinity of God, like the infiniteness of God. This is God who's beyond time, beyond space, beyond nature. And this is the aspect of God that is the life force of all creation. The Shem Havaya, when we say it's beyond time, beyond space, beyond nature, it's the name that represents Haya Hove V'Yiyeh, right? Which is past, present, and future. Haya means was, Hove is, and Yiyeh means will be. So this aspect of God is an aspect of God that's, well, it's beyond nature. We don't just mean nature as in like the trees and the, and all that sort of stuff. When we talk about nature, we're talking about creation in general, all of creation in general. The way the physical world operates. That's what we mean by nature. That includes the billions of Milky Ways galaxies that we can't even count. All of that is within nature in the sense that this is all the physical creation. So the name of Havaya, this Shem Havaya, this name of Havaya, is a name that transcends all that. There's no limitation to it because it exists, well, I'll say whatever means exists, but it's past, present, and future all at the same time. Time in general is a limitation. It's a structure. That's what time is. We exist in the time we live in now. We don't exist in 1747. We exist right now. It's beyond space because there's no physical limitation of it. And of course, it's beyond nature. It's beyond the law and the rules of nature. This Shem Havaya represents, in short, infinity. It's this infinite aspect of God. This is also the part of God that is the driving life force in all of creation. This is ultimately the aspect of God that gives life to all of creation. However, it doesn't just magically occur. We're going to get into much more because if it would just happen like that, we wouldn't be able to exist. We would not be independent entities. And it's going to go into a whole metaphor about the sun and all that sort of stuff. We know the sun rays and the sun. There's no sun rays inside of the sun. The Shem Havaya is the sun. Nothing exists inside the sun. It's just sun. Now we have a Shem Elokim. This is the name of Elokim. In Hebrew, Teva means nature. So the word HaTeva, which means the nature. So HaTeva, it has the same gematria, numerical equivalent as the name of Elokim. We take from this that there must be a connection between these two words. What is the connection between these two words? In general, the Shem Havaya is a name of giving, and the name of Elokim is judgment, like restriction. This name of Elokim conceals the infinite, so existence could appear natural and independent. Basically, because the Shem Havaya is the sun. There's no sun rays in the sun. So we need something that will allow for sun rays to exist. And that's what the name of Elokim does. In the language of the people, in the vernacular, we call it nature. Nature is what allows this great infinite light to quote unquote exist in this world without us all becoming subsumed in the sun. It allows us to operate as existing entities. We can actually experience existence because the name Elokim steps in and conceals the great light. Also going back to Tanya, we learned about Tzimtzumim, which was the contraction, kind of putting down these veils sort of over the window shades, right, to kind of dim, so the light gets a little bit dimmed. You have the contractions and you have the concealment. So this name of Elokim, that's what the name of Elokim does. It takes this great infinite light and it packages it in a way that we can handle it. Not just in a way that we can handle it, but in a way that we can also come about. Because we're also sun rays. Everything that exists in creation is some sort of sun ray, but people themselves are sun rays. If we would just be all within the sun, then there's nobody. It's just sun. Shem Havaya is like the sun, and Shem Elokim is what allows sun rays to come about. This is what allows for the natural order of the world. This is what allows for nature. So it takes the great light, this light force, and it packages it into nature. It packages it into creation. So what does that have to do with anything? Every existence has a unique godly life force. That's how it can exist. That's how it is in this world. You, and the rock and the tree and the table and the car, everything has a unique godly life force. What that godly life force does is that it defines the parameters and the nature of its existence. This life force will bring a rock into existence. This life force will bring this person with this character and capacity and talents or whatever into existence. This life force will bring that into existence, will bring that into existence, etc. Therefore, the nature of the entity, as in the way it is, reflects the life force that it has. The rock has a rock life force. The boulder has the boulder life force. Bob has the Bob life force. And Joe has a Joe life force. And Sarah has a Sarah life force. Every entity, according to, I see how you exist, I see how you operate, I could kind of get an idea of what kind of life force you must have. The life force of a rock doesn't let it speak. The life force in a person lets it speak. So it's a different kind of life force that's there. What is giving you life right now? What is the godly light that you have right now that actually gives you life? So now we're going to have our first point that we drive home in the Maamar. So now let's go back to Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu. What do we say? Listen, Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, this name of Havaya, this infinite life force is our nature. What we actually get life from is from Havaya. Remember, Elokeinu is Elokim, which is nature. What is the nature of our entities? What is the nature of our existence as a Jewish person? Is the Shem Havaya, is the name of Havaya. So listen up, all the Jewish people. Our life force, what brings us to life and gives us life, is something that is beyond nature. We tap into something that is higher than nature, that is not bound and limited by time, space, nature, creation. Why? Because the life force that we have is from the Shem Havaya. It's from the light of the infinite, the life of the infinite. Not just that, but the nature of the Jewish people, what we can do, what we can achieve, is we can elicit a revelation which is beyond the limitations of nature, into nature. Because this is my nature. My nature comes from something beyond nature. If beyond the limitations, I can actually draw that light into nature itself. The nature of the entity reflects its life force. My life force is the name Shem Havaya. My life force comes from this name of Havaya. And it's not just that this is my life force. It's not just this is my nature. It's that I can actually elicit it. I can actually draw it down into these limitations of nature. I can bring the infinite down into the physical world. Well, that's what we could do as Jewish people. One more thing. Well, I'll give you two things. First of all, it gives a side note. So it's in this Chassidic Heritage Series, but they use it a bunch of times where it talks about why do we use light as a metaphor for godliness. There's like a Kabbalistic aspect to it. But part of the reason why it says that light works really well as the metaphor for godliness is because light has to remain attached to its source. If you have light in a room, if you don't move away the light, if you cut off the light source, the light goes away. Same thing with godliness, same thing with all of creation, that we have to remain attached to our source. Without the source there's no creation, there's no life, there's no anything. Another reason is because light itself is not affected by its surroundings. In the sense that light just shines. Remember, the sun shines indiscriminately. It's not like redhead, don't burn the redhead up. Like we're looking now, in the last 2 days when it was like a bazillion degrees outside. Like, wow, the ground looks pretty dry. The sun at one point was not like, oh, okay, we finished here. We dried this section out. Let's move over a little bit. The sun shines. Taking it a step further, the only way we would not see the light of the sun, God forbid, we're going to sidebar on the sidebar right now. Where does the sun go on a cloudy day? Well, nowhere. It didn't go anywhere. It was blocked. The sun is constant. The sun is always shining. There's only 2 reasons why we don't see the sun. 1, something blocks it, or 2, we've turned away from it. The sun is always there and the sun is always shining. It's always. We are the ones who don't see it sometimes. Again, either because it's blocked or because we've turned away. The sun is constant. That's part of what makes it the sun. Part of the nature of the sun. That's what the sun is. End of sidebar. Light has to remain attached to its source. It's not affected by its surroundings. And the light itself, there's no depletion in the luminary. As in the sun can shine, 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 and it doesn't take away from the sun the more light it gives. A fire has that character trait too. You can light a bazillion candles from the same flame technically. So that's the same idea with the light. Lights can just give light and the sun just shines, and there's no difference to the sun. When we talk about light, obviously, and especially in this context, we're usually talking about spiritual. We talk about darkness, we're usually talking about spiritual, like a lack of spiritual awareness. So it will be spiritual darkness versus spiritual light. And then in general, we refer to godliness as light because it's a good metaphor considering all these things. So we'll re-punchline everything that part of what our work here in the world, and especially this is part of what the Shema is going to be telling us, is when we do Torah mitzvahs, when we commit, we're developing a relationship with God and all this sort of things, part of what we're proving is not just committed to the cause or whatever it is, we're also proving that creation itself is not limited to this physical world that we know it to be. Instead, we're saying the real truth of reality, the real truth of existence is the infinite God, is this infinity that is even beyond time and space. We're doing what we're doing because this infinite God wanted us to turn this world into a dwelling place for him, into a world of Torah mitzvahs. We do this through Torah mitzvahs. You know what it's kind of like? When you look at the 10 Commandments, Shavuos is coming up. So you say that if you line them up, the 5 and the 5, if you go across like this, they actually line up the ones that are across from each other. Like 1 through 5 and 6 through 10. So Shabbos is lined up with don't be a false witness. So they say, what does being a false witness have to do with Shabbos? Why do we keep Shabbos? God said, thou shalt keep Shabbos. Yes, okay, but why do we keep Shabbos? Because God says, I created the world in 6 days, on the 7th day you rest. That's why we have a Shabbos. So when we rest on the 7th day, when we celebrate, when we say, oh, Shabbos is different, we celebrate Shabbos and you have your gefilte fish, or whatever you're having on your Shabbos, we are testifying to God's creation of the world. We're testifying to God being in the world and to God having created the world in 6 days and resting on the 7th. So it's not just a matter of, oh, there's a mitzvah to keep the Shabbos. It lines up with don't be a false witness because it's actually a testimony to our belief in creationism and God having created the world and that there is a God of this world, etc. The parallel to that here is that through this work that we have of making the world a dwelling place for God, etc., what we're doing is that we're proving that the world is more than just the physical realm that we know of. We're also trying to say, why would you dedicate your life to that? Because I'm dedicating myself to something that's beyond. That's like people who commit themselves to these causes, right? Because the cause is so much bigger than I am, and it's so much bigger than the world we live in, etc. Well, this is the ultimate, because this is the God cause. Through the work that we do of eliciting this infinite light down into the physical world, it's not just this is what the effect of Torah mitzvahs is. It's also a deliberate, I guess you could even call it a testimony, but it's a deliberate demonstration. It's a deliberate showing of this world is not the be-all to end-all. There is something beyond this world, and the ultimate is to bring the beyond into this world. The reason why we do that is because we also believe in what's beyond this world. We're connecting to that. We're testifying to it through the Torah mitzvahs that we do and that we keep.